The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, cutting long, golden stripes across the cracked vinyl booths of Millie's Diner ***. The air carried the comfortable weight of routine, the smell of brewed coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint hum of an old jukebox in the corner playing a faded country tune. Forks clinked against plates, conversations rose and fell softly, and the world outside drifted by slow as the ceiling fan turning above. At the booth near the window sat Tom Bennett a man the town barely noticed anymore. 78 years old, back straight but frail, his silver hair cropped close, his jacket pressed as if he still inspected it every morning. On the table beside his untouched sandwich sat a worn service cap, the patch faded but clear, *US. Army, 2nd Infantry Division, *. Every so often, he reached for his coffee, steadying his trembling hand before lifting the cup. He wasn't a man of many words. The regulars knew him as the polite old vet who came in every Thursday at 2 p.m., sat by the window, tipped well, and left quietly. Today was no different until the door swung open with a clang and a burst of loud laughter filled the room. Jake Rowe, walked in with his two buddies, all swagger and noise. Baseball caps backward, shirts half tucked, voices too big for the space. The kind of men who believed loudness meant confidence. Emma, the young waitress behind the counter, tensed a little. Everyone in town knew Jake, the mechanic's son who thought he ruled the streets because he could throw a punch and charm a crowd. Jake spotted Tom almost immediately. His smirk spread like a shadow. "Well, look who we got here," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Old soldier boy still fightin' his wars with a cup of coffee, huh?" Tom didn't look up. He stirred his drink once more and set the spoon down with care. The sound of metal on ceramic seemed to echo louder than Jake's laughter. Jake strutted closer, his friends snickering behind him. "What's wrong, old man? Forget how to talk? You one of those types who just stares and hopes the world remembers you were tough once?" Emma tried to step in. "Jake, leave him alone," she said quietly. Jake ignored her. He leaned over Tom's booth, the smell of cheap beer heavy on his breath. "I'm talking to you, Grandpa. Didn't they teach you manners in the army?" Still no response. Tom's eyes stayed on his coffee, his posture calm, unbothered. That calmness only made Jake angrier. With a sharp flick of his hand, Jake slapped the old veteran's cap off the table. It landed on the floor with a soft thud. The entire diner went still, forks frozen midair, voices dying into silence. "Shut up," Jake sneered. "You don't get to sit here looking all high and mighty when you can't even stand without shaking." Tom finally looked up. His eyes were pale, distant, not weak, but haunted by things no one in that diner could imagine. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, steady as a rifle barrel. "You have no idea what real fear looks like, son." The words didn't rise, they cut. Jake laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "Yeah? What are you gonna do, old man? Throw your cane at me?" He pushed Tom's shoulder, not hard, but enough to make the cup spill and the diner gasp. Tom didn't flinch. He simply steadied himself, reached down, and picked up his cap. He brushed the dust off it with slow precision, like the act itself meant something sacred. Emma's voice trembled as she said, "Jake, that's enough." But Jake wasn't done. "No, I think the geezer's got a lesson to learn about respect," he said, stepping closer. That moment, that shove, that arrogance would be the spark that set the whole town ablaze by sundown. Tom looked up one last time, his eyes sharp as steel under years of wear. And though he didn't move, something in the air shifted an invisible tension that made even Jake pause for a heartbeat. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of approaching sirens. The air outside the diner shimmered with heat, the kind that made the asphalt ripple and the horizon bend. The laughter had stopped. Inside, the once busy hum of clinking cups and quiet conversation was replaced by a silence that pressed heavy on every chest. Tom Bennett sat half-slumped against the edge of the booth, his cap in one hand, his other braced on the table for balance. The coffee he'd spilled crept slowly across the floor, forming a dark stain that reflected the trembling fluorescent lights above. Emma stood by the counter, her knuckles white around the phone she held just moments ago. Her voice had been barely a whisper when she spoke to the dispatcher. Asterisk. There's been an assault. Please hurry. Asterisk. She hadn't even given the full story before hanging up. She knew Jake's temper, and she'd seen the way his friends were watching him now, nervous, uncertain, as if realizing they'd gone too far. Jake paced near the door, adrenaline still buzzing through his veins, but his laughter had turned uneasy. "You shouldn't have gotten in my face," he muttered, trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Tom didn't answer. The old veteran just wiped his hand across his mouth and stared at the floor, jaw clenched tight enough to make the muscles tremble. Then came the sound. Not the small-town wail of a police siren, but the low, throaty hum of an engine too smooth, too powerful. Heads turned toward the window. A sleek, black SUV glided to a stop outside, its tinted windows catching the glare of the afternoon Sunday. The chrome emblem on the front grille wasn't local. It didn't belong to any sheriff's department. It belonged to something federal. Two men stepped out first, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark suits with earpieces coiled discreetly behind their necks. They moved with quiet precision, scanning the lot before one of them touched a finger to his ear and gave a short nod. Then, from the back seat, the door opened. The woman who emerged didn't look like she belonged in a diner parking lot in the middle of nowhere. Her suit was sharp, tailored. Her posture carried the kind of command that didn't need to be announced. Sunlight flashed across the small Homeland security badge clipped to her belt. Her eyes cool, focused, the kind that had seen too much and forgot how to flinch, locked instantly on the window. Inside, Emma gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's Claire Bennett." The door creaked open as Claire stepped inside, her heels clicking once against the tile before the sound vanished under the weight of silence. Every head turned. The agents followed her in, one to the left, one to the right, moving without words. Tom, still on the floor, looked up as she approached, his lips parted slightly, disbelief flickering in his tired eyes. "Claire?" he rasped. She knelt beside him without hesitation, one hand on his shoulder. "Dad, are you all right?" Jake's jaw tightened. He took a step back but tried to keep his voice cocky. "Who the hell are you supposed to be? Some lawyer?" Claire rose slowly. The diner seemed to shrink around her. "I'm the woman," she said, her tone even and unhurried, "who signs the orders to detain people like you." Her words hung in the air, cold and surgical. The two agents moved closer, positioning themselves between Jake and her father. Jake's smirk faltered. "You can't just—" "Try me," Claire interrupted, her gaze steady, unblinking. "You just assaulted a decorated veteran, a federal officer's father." The agent to her left leaned down and murmured something into his wrist mic. Within seconds, another black SUV rolled up outside. Tom tried to stand, wincing as he did. "Claire, don't make a fuss," he muttered, but she steadied him gently, shaking her head. "This isn't a fuss, Dad," she said softly. "It's accountability." Jake's friends had already backed toward the corner, pale and silent. Emma stood frozen behind the counter, her eyes darting between the old man and the woman who carried herself like authority incarnate. Claire's eyes met Jake's one last time. "You think respect is weakness," she said. "But I've buried people braver than you for less." "I—" Outside, the black SUVs idled, their engines humming like thunder waiting for the cue to strike. Inside, no one dared move. Tom Bennett, the man everyone had dismissed as fragile, stood quietly beside his daughter, the woman who commanded silence just by breathing, and in that stillness, every soul in the diner understood exactly who they were dealing with. The diner felt smaller now, as if the walls had crept inward to trap everyone in the heavy quiet. No one spoke. The only sound came from the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint squeak of leather as one of the agents shifted his stance near the counter. The smell of burnt coffee hung thick in the air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of spilled blood where Tom Bennett had scraped his knuckles against the table edge. Jake Rowe stood near the booth, jaw tight, trying to gather the shards of his shattered bravado. His two friends were silent, eyes darting toward the door as if distance might erase the last 10 minutes. But leaving wasn't an option now, not with the two agents standing like statues between them and freedom. Tom sat on the floor, one knee up, trying to catch his breath. His daughter knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his arm with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in her eyes. Claire Bennett didn't need to raise her voice or even frown. Authority lived in her silence, coiled and dangerous, like a drawn bow waiting for release. Jake tried to break it. "Look, I didn't mean," he started, his voice cracking halfway through. One of the agents stepped forward and slid a leather badge case across the counter. It landed with a soft slap, flipping open to reveal the golden Homeland security seal, catching the dull fluorescent light. The room seemed to inhale all at once. Jake froze. The blood drained from his face until he looked ghostly pale. His hands, which had been hanging loose at his sides, clenched slowly into fists, though not from confidence this time, but fear. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if words were no longer a safe thing to have. Claire didn't look at him. Her focus stayed on her father as she gently helped him up, steadying him by the elbow. "You okay, Dad?" Tom nodded faintly, brushing off her help with the quiet pride of a man who'd stood taller through worse. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said under his breath. "Don't make a scene, honey. He's not worth it." Claire met his eyes, and something softened in her expression, but only for him. "It's not a scene, Dad," she said softly. "It's a lesson." She turned toward Jake then, her heels clicking against the tile, every step deliberate. The agents didn't move, they didn't need to. Their presence was gravity itself. Jake tried to find his voice again. I didn't know he was your father. I was just joking around. I didn't mean." Claire stopped a foot away from him. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, but every word hit like a hammer. "The man you just hit stormed beaches so you could sit here running your mouth. You owe your breath to people like him." Jake's head lowered, shame creeping into the corners of his face. Around them, the other customers sat frozen, some with their hands folded on their laps, others staring at the old veteran as if seeing him for the first time. Tom straightened, his service cap now back in his hand. He adjusted it, slow and steady, then looked around the room. "Don't blame the boy too hard," he murmured. "He's just never had to learn the cost of peace." Claire's eyes flicked to him again, the steel in her melting briefly into warmth. "Maybe," she said, "but it's about time he understood who paid it." Jake swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It wasn't loud enough for everyone to hear, but it was enough for Claire. She stepped back and nodded once to the agents. They didn't arrest him, not yet. Instead, one of them leaned in and said, low enough for only Jake to hear, "You're lucky your apology came before my boss gave the word." Tom sighed, his hand still resting lightly on his daughter's arm. "You always did take after your mother," he said quietly, with a faint smile. Claire gave the smallest hint of a smirk. "You raised me, Dad. Guess I learned from the best." The tension began to ease, like air slowly escaping a balloon. The diner patrons shifted in their seats again, the sound of movement, tentative but real. Emma, still behind the counter, wiped her hands nervously on her apron, her voice soft. "Mr. Bennett, can I get you a fresh coffee?" "On the house." Tom smiled, faint but genuine. "That'd be nice, dear. Black, please." Jake stood there, hollowed out, every ounce of arrogance gone. His friends had already backed toward the door, not daring to breathe too loudly. Claire watched him one last time, eyes cold and knowing. "Remember this," she said quietly. "Real strength doesn't need to shout. Then she turned back to her father, helping him to his booth as the agents resumed their silent guard. The weight of respect earned, not demanded, hung in the air, and for once, even Jake Rowe understood what it meant to stand in the presence of someone who'd already fought for every breath he'd ever taken. The last light of day stretched long over the diner parking lot, fading into the kind of gold that turned everything soft before night claimed it. The neon sign above the door flickered weakly, buzzing in the hush that had fallen over Main Street. The black SUVs still idled, their headlights cutting pale beams through the dust in the air. Jake Rowe stumbled forward, wrists bound in steel. His earlier swagger was gone, replaced by trembling hands and a face drained of color. The agents flanked him on either side, their movements crisp and wordless. Each step Jake took echoed too loudly against the pavement, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of everything he'd said, everything he'd done, and everything he now wished he could take back. Inside the diner, people had pressed up against the windows, their silhouettes framed in the fading glow. No one whispered, no one laughed. The same mouths that had smiled when the old veteran was mocked now stayed closed, shame flickering across their faces like the last light of the sun slipping behind the horizon. Tom Bennett stood near the hood of the SUV, one hand braced on the metal, his breathing slow but steady. His service cap hung loosely in his other hand, the wind teasing at the brim. His daughter stood beside him, posture straight, face unreadable under the dim orange wash of the streetlights. When the agents paused, waiting for her nod, Claire Bennett stepped closer to her father. Her voice lowered, soft enough that only he could hear. "You okay?" Tom gave a small nod. "I'm fine," he said, his words rough but firm. Then, with a quiet sigh, he added, "You didn't have to do all this, honey." Claire turned toward him, her features softening for the first time that evening. "You did enough for all of us already," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've earned a quiet life. The least I can do is protect it." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried years of memory of battlefields, of friends lost and saved, of his little girl running across the yard with scraped knees and a toy soldier clutched in her hand. "Still got that fire," he murmured. "Your mother would have liked that." She glanced down, just for a moment, and nodded. "I like to think she's the one who gave it to me." A short distance away, one of the agents opened the SUV door. Jake hesitated before ducking inside, his eyes darting to the ground, to anything but the old man he'd laid hands on. He started to mumble something, maybe an apology, maybe just noise, but no one paid it any mind. The door shut with a heavy thud that seemed to end something more than the confrontation itself. Tom adjusted his cap, the movement deliberate, ceremonial. His hand trembled slightly, but his back stayed straight. Claire stepped aside as he turned toward the diner. Through the glass, Emma stood by the counter, tears in her eyes. One by one, the people inside rose from their seats. No one needed a cue. Hands went to hearts, hats came off. The flag outside fluttered against the pole, catching a faint breeze that carried the smell of coffee, dust, and quiet reverence. Tom didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at them, at the faces that had once turned away, now lit with something that looked like respect. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Claire watched him, pride and tenderness crossing her face like the last rays of the sun over the ridge. The wind tugged at her hair, and the faint hum of the engines filled the silence. Tom turned toward her again, eyes tired but bright. "Let's go home," he said simply. She opened the passenger door for him, but he paused before getting in. He looked back one last time at the diner, the flag, the people who had finally remembered what that little patch on his cap meant. Then he placed the cap on his head, straightened it with care, and lifted his chin. The man who had been told to shut up walked away in silence, his steps steady, his shoulders squared, his dignity unbroken. And as the SUVs rolled out onto the quiet street, the town stayed still, no chatter, no laughter, just the low flutter of the flag in the evening wind. For the first time in years, silence didn't come from indifference, it came from respect.